Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us today. We have a great panel discussion ahead of us where we will discuss the real nitty-gritties and pain points of how to implement RBI's cybersecurity guidelines, keeping a primary focus on the recent master guidelines on outsourcing. Before I hand over to the esteemed moderator and the panelists, a quick housekeeping points for everybody. 2 seconds about Cybersierra. We are a cybersecurity company that helps enterprises with their governance, third-party risk management, and continuous controls monitoring. So we look at the BFSI segment in India and helps the banks, insurers, and the asset managers apply the regulatory cyber guidelines. Why are we doing this panel? We have been speaking with quite a few of the CISOs in India from various regulated entities. We are putting together a survey as well as a research report, and it prompted us that we should bring some of the experts who are actually doing the implementation and bring it to the broader audience so that we have a good session of knowledge sharing and exchanging of notes. So that's us. Let me do a quick introduction about our esteemed guests today. We have Siddharth Durbha, director from KPMG. He'll be our panel moderator. We have the CISO from Unity Small Finance Bank, Mr. Pranav Sanjay Paranjpe. Thank you so much for coming. And Shabana, a very esteemed and respected IT governance and risk expert from the industry. Thank you very much for your time. I will leave it to all three of you to do your personal introductions, and then over to you, Siddharth, to kick off the panel.
Thanks, Subhajit. And I'm looking forward to the session. I think we've got a panel of experts here, all very experienced in the industry. So thanks for joining. Pranav, Shabana, it's going to be an interesting session. That's something that I can guarantee you. And to our esteemed audience, if you have any questions, feel free to type it away. And we will probably try and take it during the course of the session as well as post the session as well. So a brief introduction of myself. My name is Siddharth Durbha, director of the cyber team at KPMG in India. I've been focusing on cyber regulatory compliance and remediation, and it's a pleasure being here. Probably a quick introduction from Shabana and Pranav as well. Over to you, Shabana.
Yeah, so this is Shabana Mashraki. I have around 25 years plus of industry experience. I basically come from the software engineering industry. But I have worked in the software quality assurance and information security areas. And I used to be a lead assessor for ISO 27001 with BSI. Last year, I worked with SBM Bank, and now I'm transitioning to another bank, Deutsche Bank. So happy to be here. I did some significant work with IT outsourcing risk management, especially contract management. So happy to share my thoughts here on this panel.
Great, Shabana. And it would be lovely to have your view, having worked with a couple of foreign banks, in terms of your perspective as well, that you'll probably bring to the conversation. Over to you, Pranav.
Hi, good evening, everyone. First of all, thanks, Cybersierra, for inviting me to the session. Very enriching, very close to the heart topic of mine. Just a brief introduction about myself. Close to about 21 years in the cybersecurity, information security industry. Plethora of experience of mine into banking. I have been associated right now as the CISO of Unity Small Finance Bank. Prior to this, my last stint was with HDFC Bank. Happy to know that Shabana is going to join Deutsche Bank because I'm an ex-Deutsche Bank. I have also had experience to work with Stancy as well as Royal Bank of Scotland. Apart from that, I have been in the industry on the insurance sector as well. So I was, part of ICICI Prudential as well. Last but not the least, with NBFC sector as well. So I represented Mahindra Finance for about 6 years prior to HDFC Bank. So more or less, my experience has been into the NBFC and BFSI domain, and it has been really enriching. I have seen the world, transitioning from maybe a floppy disk to, a Blu-ray disk now. Right, but all said and done, really looking forward to this session because being a banker and looking after the security for the bank, this is possibly one of the most difficult areas for us to take care of. The regulators have set their sights on a lot of advisories and guidelines, and we are expected to abide to them, comply to them. So really looking forward to an engaging session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Pranav. And so please do expect a couple of questions from what SEBI is doing as well as what IRDA is doing as well. And I think we may trouble you a little bit more. But Probably coming back to you, Pranav, we'll probably start with you and we'll probably transition to Shabana as well. The primary question which everybody has in their mind is there are so many different directives which have been coming in from the regulator. And RBI is one of the regulators who's been trying to work and stay ahead of the curve in terms of looking and coming up with guidelines, dealing with be it cloud, be it outsourcing, looking at how do you deal with thought leadership around smart contracts. And we also have seen CBDC coming in. So there's a lot of action which is happening in the regulatory space. Primarily, being a bank, you are being scrutinized quite a lot. So in terms of your advice, in terms of how to stay compliant, the first question is how to keep track of the ever-growing list of compliances that you probably need to go ahead with, and how do you prep for the audit? And in terms of being a young bank, which has been digital from day one, what have been some of your learnings that you'd like to share, considering some of the guidelines which have come through from RBI, be it the draft master guidance on technology risk, as well as the guidelines on outsourcing risk which have come in, and which has a specific function for cloud service provider CSPs, as well as the rules in terms of what you can probably outsource, what you cannot. Probably we'll start with you on that particular topic.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Siddharth. I think happy to share my thoughts on this particular area. I'm going to take the third question first. We being a pretty new bank, a pretty young bank, it has been 1.5 years, close to 2 years in the reckoning. We have received our licenses about 2 years back. Since then, it has been a roller coaster, let me admit you, which you rightly pointed out, Siddharth. I think there are plethora of guidelines, advisories, which are being released by RBI specifically. In this section, I might talk about the RBI because that's the core piece which we have to handle. But I think, as I said, it's a roller coaster ride for us. We have been learning from day one. The first audit, which we underwent, I think that was something where we basically were shown a mirror that this is what it is. Being a small finance bank, being new to the industry, these are some of the aspects which you really have to be cautious about. You have to go a little slow because as soon as you enter into the business, the businesses really want to run at a very steady pace or fast pace. But at the same time, managing the cyber and the information security piece is very, very important. In the initial phases, you do not have the relevant employees, the relevant subject matter experts as part of the bank. So it's really challenging, and I'm happy to share that with the second audit happening by the RBI side cell, we are a much improved baby, I would call it. We have been looking into the advisories and the guidelines which have been continuously released by RBI. That leads me to your second question, wherein how do we keep a track of all these advisories? I think it has been really made simple by the RBI. I must congratulate and I must admire the regulators. They have been putting a lot of efforts from their side as well. And I have been meeting senior stakeholders as well as the RBI and the side cell are concerned. So a couple of things they have done. One is they typically have a dedicated team which is sharing a lot of insights in terms of what is going on in the cyber and the information security world. Accordingly, they have been drafting a lot of guidelines and advisories, and they have been shared with us. The other piece which they have done beautifully, and I'm not too sure how many of the people who have joined are from a banking domain, but they would have come to know something called as a DAKSH portal. Now, this DAKSH portal basically has been given, as a self-help to the banks, right? So the CISOs and the relevant, team members of the CISO function, some of the governance functions, they have been given some IDs to log in into this portal. And this portal itself, contains all these advisories and, the details in terms of how do you actually work on these advisories, what is expected out of these advisories. Right? So it becomes much more simple for the banks and people like us to understand. Typically, if I to talk about my experience, maybe last 10 years prior to this, maybe the advisories were quite superficial, and you have to really read between the lines to understand what the regulator is wanting us to do. Right? But now, more and more, I'm seeing a lot of progress as far as the advisory is coming, and you don't have to stress too much about it. I mean, it basically talks a lot of details in terms of what is expected out of a bank or financial institute. It also helps you to understand how you will report the compliance issues to RBI. So there are a lot of submissions which are expected basis these RBI guidelines and advisories, which we are again supposed to put into DAKSH. So it's kind of a Bible that the RBI is giving us to basically understand these advisories, then possibly work on those the mitigations or whatever process, people, technology oriented aspects which you have to look into, and then possibly report the submissions to RBI so that they can come to us and tell this is where you are good, this is where you are you have to cover a lot of. So I think, my take for these two people would be, that's something which is really eased out, if not very easy, but yes, definitely as compared to the last 10 years, it has been really, really good for us.
So Pranav, you made an interesting point there, specifically in terms of one, not only is the regulator forward-looking, but they're also working closely with the industry as well in terms of seeking feedback as well as working with the broader industry participants. So I think that is something which we've noted. Probably coming back to you, Shabana, again, I may probably pick on you specifically from a foreign banking organization perspective. What is your take in terms of how difficult is it, or what are some of the specific aspects of the outsourcing guidelines which are coming from RBI for foreign banking organizations with a banking license in India? So in terms of them being able to comply and also keeping track of global regulations, because one, they have their home country requirements as well as they have very specific requirements from RBI, be it around data protection, data localization, and also in terms of what they're allowed to do, and the compliance checklist goes on and on, right? So typically, what have you seen and how you dealt with? What are some of the best practices that you have dealt with during your time with the multiple banks that you spent, and what do you look at specific requirements from the master directive on outsourcing with respect to foreign banking organizations? You'd like to share with our panelists?
So I'm sorry to just start my speech with one correction that I have worked only in one bank and one foreign bank, not multiple banks. I am now moving to another bank, so that's to set the expectations. But I have worked in the compliance role for a long time, and I have seen organizations trying to implement a NIST or an ISO, etc. But when I came into the bank, the first thing that pleasantly surprised me was how RBI had its nerve on the current threat landscape and how they are responding with new master directions and guidelines in a very timely way. And the inputs that are taken for these guidelines are from the emerging threat landscape as well as from the emerging security frameworks like SANS or NIST and so many other sources from which RBI gleans its directives. So that was a pleasant surprise that it takes away. I'm comparing another industry with a regulated industry. It takes away a lot of grunt for you to decide what controls to implement. RBI is always giving us what we have to do. So it makes life slightly easier. And also it's very specific to finance, so that itself is a great thing. And if you ask me how we have been implementing, we have been maintaining an RBI obligation register in which we have listed out all of RBI's requirements that they have been. But since new guidelines, I think, take precedence over the old ones, right? That we have to keep in and especially IT, because IT is a highly evolving function, okay? And the threat landscape is evolving faster than the tech landscape. So we need to, be right on top. So as soon as we get these directives, we start putting them down in points and we analyze how we are compliant to its requirements and what is it that we need to do. Luckily, RBI also gives us time to implement it. Once it releases a guideline, like the guideline was released a few months back and it's applicable from October onwards. So banks have had time to go through the controls and see what they have already and what they need to implement.
Thanks for that, Shabana. And probably what I've also seen is actually having an up-to-date risk and controls register, which is clear in terms of having a control catalog mapped to different as well as to different control standards, regulations. It definitely helps you having that in a centralized place and probably having different implementation so that you're not disturbing your business teams so often. So people do hate auditors and assessors because as we are actually keeping the organization safe, but we do see the fair share of concerns from the business team. But at the end of the day, we are here to actually serve the business team. Probably that makes me come back to the prior question that I asked to Pranav. Given that you are being digital first from day one, in terms of keeping many of your applications, I believe you're cloud first, keeping safe. So from a cloud security perspective, if you would like to share in terms of any of your best practices or what you foresee as specific requirements from the regulator on using cloud-based platforms or SaaS-based platforms as well, and the different services that you're running, and also to share your 2 cents on resiliency, because that's a key focus for banks for always available services, and even the regulators actually focusing on the resiliency aspect. Something that we've not seen, something that we may see soon, are specific guidelines around scenarios. Cyber stress testing is something which may definitely come in future, which is currently not mandatory, but all of you are doing simulation, attack simulations and others. If we can probably share 2 cents, Pranav, specifically on cloud security as well as on the resiliency bit, and I'll come back to Shabana on the same topic as well. Pranav?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, again, I'll refer to the recent RBI audit which we were subjected to. And this was one of the prime areas. You rightly mentioned, we are a digital first bank. And so all our channels, all our businesses are running on digital channels. And we are a cloud native organization as well. So that basically warrants us to look into a lot of security as far as cloud instances are concerned. But I want to take one step back and possibly, put down 3 scenarios, which, we have been running with in terms of, how this specific cloud instance or cloud instances have been used to our greater advantage. So I think I would love to list down 3 cloud instances. One is more of a private cloud where we have a complete control on our infrastructure as well as the application. The other is a well-known model, which is a SaaS service model where software as a service which is being put in. The third model is, of course, infrastructure as a service. So these are the 3 models which typically, rather if I can, vouch for my own bank, then we have been running with all the 3 models together. Typical, scenario wherein SaaS-based, are something which is of a great concern to RBI. This is what I could sense out of the current audit. Apparently, what happens is, because in a SaaS-based model, I do not have any control over the infrastructure. They really want us to have at least an oversight and an overview in terms of what is happening inside the cloud infrastructure. Because the very premise behind going for a SaaS model is not to have any control or not to worry about the underlying infrastructure. But at the same time, RBI's focus is very clear that if it's your information, then you should be having an oversight on whatever is happening. Model. The last, the first model and the third model, which is more of a private cloud, which is completely under my control. It's just a matter of putting it onto a different cloud service product rather than having it in-house. And the last one, which is the infrastructure as a service, wherein I'm just trying to rent out infrastructure on one of the cloud service providers, and possibly I still have control over the infrastructure. I think these 2 is something which typically will definitely warrant us to look into certain specific standards like the NIST. I made some notes of mine because this is something which is a new area. So I see this an ISO standard as well, which is typically talking about the cloud infrastructure and the security towards it, which is ISO 27018 and 17, right? And to answer your question, I think resiliency is also a very important aspect which I was being asked for by the RBI guys. So they are really wanting us to know, how and what are our plans as far as my resilience is concerned. Typically, organizations will do away saying my cloud service providers are giving me a 99.99% time. But if you back calculate, what is the actual time which the businesses are losing, that could range anywhere between 3 to 4 business working days. And for a bank of our size, or for a bank, any financial institution, 4 working days, if it falls, in totality in a week's time, I think it's going to be a big loss of business to any financial institution. So resilience is again one of the important aspects which RBI has wanted us to look into. I think with the cloud service providers also, they have been talking about, a zoning concept. So, they could possibly have or create certain zones wherein maybe a Mumbai zone or a Western zone might cater to a Southern zone. Right. So in case the Mumbai zone or the Western zone goes down, then I think the South zone can pick it up as early as possible. So resilience is again one of the very critical aspects. But to list down a few, I think which I mentioned ISO 27017 and 18, NIST CIS, which Shabana talked about. I think those are possibly one of the best when it comes to on-prem. And now, I have seen a lot of improvements on the NIST CIS standards, which basically talk about how do you manage your own security from a cloud standpoint as well. So we do see a lot of changes being put into these standards as well. I think, yeah, more or less, we would. Okay, one more aspect which brings my attention to is apart from the cloud security, they were also interested to know, where the basic checks around the cloud security posture management, the infrastructure vulnerability assessment, penetration testings, your lookout on, how the PII data is being handled on the cloud infrastructure. Because unfortunately, if the infrastructure is not under my control, then I do not control who all have admin access to the cloud services. So that was one of the other areas which was really pointed out with the data privacy, act coming into picture. And although the nitty-gritties are yet not out, but I think sooner or later we are going to hear about it. And as a financial institute, as a bank, we really want to start with having a DPO and possibly, work towards securing and protecting our first PII information as well. So I think more or less these are, two sense of mind towards how, we are trying to manage cloud security. And, obviously it's early days for us as well. But yeah, this is something which, I could definitely share with them.
There are a couple of points that you mentioned. I'm going to come back to you on those. Data privacy is again something which is on everybody's minds. We will come back to that as well as on the different tooling which is currently available for automating posture monitoring, be it CASB, be it KNAP, and we're also moving away from Kubernetes security to K-natives right now. We will probably come to those. But probably, Shabana, from your perspective, you've heard what Pranav had to share. So from your perspective, I would also want you to share best practices that you have seen, as well as specific concerns or challenges that you have seen in terms of either implementing DevSecOps or in general using cloud. Did you face any challenges from your internal teams, business, when you were trying to implement technology risk or controls and having a proper structured way for migrating from on-prem applications and migrating to cloud? So what were some of the typical challenges that you have seen, given that many of our banks, which are not as new or are still in the process of migrating or adopting cloud as well?
Yeah. So see, though we are a small bank, though we are a foreign bank, we are a small bank. So we have limitations on our budgets. I am bringing in the commercial aspect because security comes at a cost. Okay, so it depends on how much you can afford. You can afford a really you can afford an IBM and all that. You get controls in place without having to worry about, because they invest in that kind of infrastructure, the security infrastructure of all their solutions here. But it's not always possible to go with the big guys. So sometimes the banks have to take a call. I think that is the challenge that we are facing, the cost and RBI's requirements. From the new IT outsourcing directive, I would say if we manage to meet those requirements, we should feel good about ourselves. The controls that they have suggested in those, it's a directive, it's not a suggestion, but the controls which we have to fulfill for RBI are really well designed, and they really help in improving the InfoSec posture of our cloud computing. They ask you to analyze what model of outsourcing you want, whether it's a SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and how you are going to govern it. Okay, they even ask you to implement. There is a clause on identity access management, for example. Okay, and the tone of this directive is very clear. Earlier, when I used to audit organizations, I used to repeatedly hear from my auditees that ये तो हमने outsource कर दिया है. It's their responsibility, not my responsibility, or not as much of my responsibility. So the new directive is putting the finger on this. course you are responsible. You outsource, don't outsource, but it's your responsibility. So that's very clear coming out of this latest directive. And so now it's up to the banks to decide, okay, how much you want to outsource and how much control you want to exercise on the outsourced activity. What kind of controls you have? There's no choice on how much you have to control. You have to control almost everything because it's your data, your transactions running on that infra. So you have to follow localization guidelines. You have to follow the Data Protection Act guidelines, definitely. Whether you want to go for a multi-tenancy or a multi-location, or that you have to go through those questions and you have to assess. So what I recommend for banks is that they identify the clauses that are given in this new directive. They prepare a checklist and run through that checklist for each vendor when they go through an outsourcing process. Okay. See, there are even criteria given for the cloud service providers. So, what kind of architecture and service they are using, what kind of identity access management they have, what kind of security controls they have, and what monitoring agreements you have with these vendors. This is very critical from RBI's perspective. Are you going to go to audit them on their premises? What will be the frequency of audit, for example? And what are the reports that you will monitor? These are the things that RBI auditors have gone into to assess what kind of control we are exercising on our cloud service providers. There's, description of software level, hardware level controls, key management, how the logs will be, maintained. Quite detailed guidelines are given, and really good guidelines, really worth implementing. So it's early also. So I think banks and vendors are negotiating and trying to figure out kaise karna hai. That's happening right now.
So you did mention, I think, two important points in terms of one, segmentation of your vendors, in terms of tiering, whether it's a tier 1 vendor or 2 basis. What is the service that you actually outline? What level of data do they have access to?
Yes.
As well as how is the service being provided? Let's say if it's provided on a cloud-enabled platform, software as a service, what you definitely need to is take a look at the contractual agreements that you have in place.
Yeah.
Also, whether security testing has been done on the vendor side. And also, we are moving towards an age of continuous monitoring. So typically, we have seen vendors being assessed probably once a year. But I think what regulators and others are also talking about is ongoing monitoring or even continuous monitoring.
Absolutely.
Where you're actually performing ongoing scans. If there's any negative news about your vendor, you need to action it fast. We have already seen certain guidelines coming in where if there's any incident, be it at your end or any of your critical vendors, the point that you mentioned, Shabana, the buck stops with the bank. So the bank has to be super careful in terms of the set of vendors it works with, and also ensuring compliance and ensuring that the overall maturity of the vendors also increase along. Because we've seen so many third-party attacks coming in from vendor side, right? So I think that's a point that you mentioned in terms of the buck stopping with the bank.
Oh yes, and because of this, when I have always been part of the contract reviews from the security perspective, and we put in a lot of clauses after this directive. I mean, we always had clauses for security, then we added some more because of the new directive. And vendors came back and said, "You all are a regulated entity. Hum to nahi hai. Why should we?" But we have to tell them that, of course, if you are a bank, you want to do business with a bank, these controls apply to you just straight away because of that. And we can't. And RBI in their audits has gone into contracts and read what kind of controls we have implemented for governing the risk related to outsourcing. So, and there's we face that. So there's no escaping that. So we have had to be very strict with our contract.
Right. Thanks for that.
I would actually like to add one point what Shabana was saying, because of my recent experience with RBI. He's absolutely rightly mentioned that they are actually reading through. They are investing a lot of time, reading through our agreements. they sab chalta hai attitude is something which now they are absolutely not ready with. And if you say that these are the 5 security controls which the cloud service provider or any third party is supposed to manage, they are specifically asking cost. If they are managing them for you, what is your oversight? What is your OP on those? Right. So that is very specific, and that's a very valid point. So I just wanted to add these 2 comments on that.
Yeah. And before I come back to the topic around resiliency and cloud, I still have more questions for you on that, Pranav. I wanted to have Shabana's views in terms of exit clauses and also in terms of data retention, data safety, data governance. Specifically, these are all important aspects of third-party risk, given that you're actually sharing sensitive information about your customers with these organizations. So probably if you want to share a bit more of your views around the overall data governance, data lifecycle, right from storage, retention, and also in terms of in light of the Data Privacy and Data Protection Act coming through, what do you believe should be certain focus areas for FIs in terms of securing as well as protecting client data while outsourcing to third parties as well? Maybe Shabana take that, followed by Pranav, and then I'll come back to the resiliency and polycloud aspects as well.
I think to answer your first question, all this while when on-premise setups were being primarily focused on by the banks and the financial institutes, data residing over the bank's network was not a problem. But when it comes to information being shared on the cloud infrastructure, I think it becomes really a challenge now to maintain, to manage, to have a visibility on what nature of information is lying on the cloud, and then how long do we retain? Because on one side we are talking about certain specific compliances which we have to follow, that the information, for that matter, if it's a transactional information, we are supposed to retain it for 7 years, right? But at the end of the day, if before the 7 years retention happens, if there is a glitch in the engagement with the cloud service provider, and then I don't want to continue with the cloud service provider, I think in such specific cases, it becomes really a challenging task in terms of not only to have complete visibility in terms of where all this information of mine is lying, because I do not have complete visibility on what exactly is their infrastructure, what are locations these guys are using for my data to be kept. One little clause by mentioning that your information is not going out of India's geographical boundaries will not help us these days. Now it has gone into one step ahead, and then possibly we want to know where actually on cloud is that information being hosted as far as the geographical boundaries are concerned. So that is one aspect which we as a bank are very, very specific about, precisely because of the reason that we do not have visibility on where the information is going. So to come back to the specific questions, I think though we have to follow the guidelines of the regulators to retain our information for a specific amount or period of time, we need to look into where this information is being stored, how long that is being put into. If there are any backups, I will talk specifically about infrastructure as a service model when it comes to the cloud services. Where are because there are a lot of because of the ransomware attacks, and people are really wary about taking their backups on site, off site, tape backups. All these concepts have really gone to the next level now. And with the advent of cloud coming in, we know for sure that the backups are being taken care of, and the restoration is also fine. But then when we are trying to get into an exit clause, that is the time when we really struggle if we are not aware of where exactly this information is stored. So I think we have to have a policy, and that is what I have done within the organization, the bank, that if you have a data retention and a disposal policy, which is possibly in line to the RBI guidelines, we need to be extra cautious when we are drafting these agreements with the service providers, because these agreements are a key in terms of how this specific information is being kept, is being managed by the cloud service provider. In case the contract ends prematurely, then what is the sort of roles and responsibility which both the parties have? So the bank has to ensure that information is being wiped out, but then at the end of the day, the cloud service provider also has to give us a comfort that these are the places, or these are the backups, or these are the geographical areas where your information was put in, and then specifically that has been quarantined, deleted, and a copy of that has to be passed on to us as well, because that again is a very important aspect. considering the data retention standards and guidelines which are set by RBI. So these are some of the aspects which I need to really look into and have to put into my incident loss as far as the CSP is concerned.
Shabana, if you want to add on to that from a data governance.
Yeah, some of the things. Yes, Pranav was pretty detailed in his explanation, but I want to add some of the experiences that I had while negotiating these things. So data, yes, we have to have an exit clause in our contracts. So I look at handling this problem in two ways. One is an outside control and an inside control. Let me explain what I mean. An outside control is contractually we agree with the vendor on how the data will be erased, whether we'll get a data erasure certificate from them at the end of this contract, etc. Internally, we could use the audit option to also, because we can't just say, okay, I put this in my contract and I'm done. You have to, RBI is in the new directive asking for robust monitoring, very specifically. So what do you do there? You go and to the extent possible audit the customer, the vendor, sorry, to ensure that they are implementing data segregation, they are implementing encryption, they are implementing all the safety security controls that we want for the data to be secure. So we have a third-party security assessment program. So part of that is to check how the database is designed to protect the data. Okay, so that is also something which we have to do. We can't, we can't be so hands-free and say, okay, we have told you this is our requirement. You have to delete data when we exit, etc. That's not enough. We have to really sometimes, situation may occur that you may not be able to, delete all the data the minute a contract terminates, because there are some requirements that require for that data to be held for a while long. Then at the time of exit, there should be agreements again on how much time that vendor will withhold the data and how they will purge it, and whether we will receive a data erasure certificate, etc. So multiple things. Yes, it will be very context based is what I'm saying. There may not be a one size fits all for all contracts, depending on what kind of data we have shared, and depending on, we even had one situation where we had to negotiate with a vendor to not only delete the data but help us migrate the data to another system. So we had to use their services for that also. So that multiple scenarios can occur there. So one has to be assess the entire canvas of data and data management and the business requirement for that data to be in different places and for different durations. That's what I'm saying.
No, totally agree. And also what we're moving away from is a point-in-time based assessment to actually monitoring continuously and continuous third-party risk, specifically where any trigger or event-based assessments are also triggered if there's a cybersecurity incident or if there's a zero-day vulnerability, etc. which is found. The other important aspect is around software supply chain security. We have seen some of these topics being come up in other regions, and RBI and others are also exploring this in terms of having an SBM, which would actually require you to look at third-party components in your own dev environment, which have a vulnerability, and you probably need to ensure that those are remediated as and when found. The other point being in terms of that, which all of you have mentioned, primarily in terms of the entire life cycle of data has to be looked at in terms of where and what you can probably have an intervention. The additional area that I've also seen, I probably want to share, is in terms of policies being enabled at a CASP level or others, in terms of looking at what is the data which is actually being sent across, and is that amount of data really required to be shared with the vendor, or you can actually follow the principle of data minimization in terms of sharing only what is required and having a data strategy in place. But at this particular point in time, I probably want to see if any of our audience members would like to have any specific questions. You're more than happy to take those questions. Otherwise, we'll go ahead with the session and we can take a few questions later on as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to actually type it out, and we'll probably take it during the course of the session as well. While the questions are coming in, I'll probably come back to you, Pranav, in terms of polycloud. So not that you're probably doing this at your bank, but from a if you were to actually have data across a polycloud environment, what are some of the best principles that you have seen in terms of managing a polycloud environment? I think while we do that, there's a question which has come up. It says RBI still doesn't have clear guidance in terms of adoption of cloud security and governance, as it is still not mentioned in the Gopal Krishnan Committee's CSF framework. While that may be true, specifically the regulator is still looking at coming out with very specific actions and policies. If you've started using cloud within your organization, having baseline security configurations is something which is expected. And as part of some of the audits, we have seen any deviations from your baseline drift in terms of not having baselines defined or others is something which definitely is looked at as well. Probably if you want to share a few pointers in terms of what some of the basic hygiene issues are probably looked at, Pranav, while some of these audits have been happening, given that you've handled them firsthand. If you want to share a few inputs on that.
Absolutely. Siddharth, I think there's something wrong with my camera. I'm not
Sure.
sure how to identify it, but I'm going to continue, answering the question in the interest of time. Right. So very basic practices, which the three types of practices or three types of cloud instances or cloud arrangements or engagements, which I just mentioned about. So I could feel, the regulators are more interested when it comes to the SaaS-based model. Now, purely because in a SaaS-based model, bank basically believes that this is something which is being managed, and we basically try to put our information into one of the best cloud service providers as far as possible. So we assume and we feel that that is something which is in safe hands. But increasingly, with the kind of applications being hosted or being put into the SaaS-based services and the kind of sophisticated cyber attacks which are happening, increasingly the banks need to have more and more insight as far as what is happening within the SaaS-based or the such instances or such engagements wherein the control on the infrastructure is missing or at least hazy, at least to the bank. Right? So 2-3 things which I would possibly want to do is, one is of course we want to have as an organization a cloud security standard or a cloud security acceptable posture, let me put it that way. This is something which we have started working on as a bank. So typically what happens is, because I do not have much oversight as far as the SaaS cloud service providers are concerned, I want to ensure that at least with the contractual level and when we are deep diving into the engagement, I want to set a minimum baseline standard which the cloud service provider has to demonstrate. Right? It might go at a very basic level in terms of how and when the patching is happening, how and when the hardening is in place. I know it is different when it comes to the way the cloud machines are being spun up. And then because I have a very recent experience putting some of my applications into the cloud, and then the way these machines are spun up, and then possibly the configurations are being made. So it works slightly different when it comes to putting our systems into the cloud. But starting very basics, the hardening, the patching, etc., we need to have visibility, if not complete control over these activities. It might sound very primitive, but I think most of the cyber attacks which might have happened, very recently, it is a very small mistake of maybe not patching a server or not having requisite hardening parameters enabled, because of which it got exploited. No fault of the application, but purely because of the infrastructure being exploited is where I fall prey to the cyber attacks. So these are some examples. I can talk in details in terms of how we are trying to set up the minimum baseline for the crowd. But I think referring to the other standards which I talked about, the 27018 and 17, then the NISTs of the world. I just came across, I was reading the other day, there is one standard called as FISMA. FISMA is something which is very prevalent in the US markets. I do not have much know about of the FISMA, but I've heard that it specifically talks about how do you securely access the cloud. What are the user access controls? How the privileged identity management is happening within the cloud? What is the sorts of SOC reporting a cloud should have? Right. So because my SOC cannot be integrated with a SaaS service provider, now what is the kind of oversight and the monitoring which is there on their SOC is something which, as a client, as a owner of the information, I should have a know-how upon. So these are these are very few aspects which will go into the minimum baselining of the cloud, and that is how we are wanting to move ahead, and project ourselves as a safe and secure digital first bank.
Sure. Anything that you would like to add on that, Shabana?
Just this, that we found the NIST framework very helpful in implementing these kind of controls for cloud. That, and of course the monitoring. So yeah, depending on the level of monitoring that we can possibly have, like Pranav mentioned, in a SaaS, it is a little difficult, but we can definitely negotiate on the kind of reports they will be, helping us with, so that we can monitor through those reports, and what level of control we have, what level of turnaround times to our, to our requests based on those reports. That would help us in taking timely action if required. That's all.
So the two things which I would like to add is investing in a good CSPM tool or a CNAP tool, and also in terms of monitoring your vendors' compliance with baseline security configurations. As like Pranav mentioned, if you have defined something for your bank, you need to ensure that your third party is also adhering to them, and probably using real-time scans, or if they provide you OAuth, certain times the vendor may not agree to it, but if they do, if you're an important client, it's worth probably looking at the controls in real-time check in terms to see if they really have the controls working or not. That is something which is quite interesting. Probably coming to the difficult questions, I think there's one particular topic which in everyone's mind is the new data protection and privacy bill, right? So in terms of readiness, in terms of best practices, I think all of you would have already had privacy as a major area of concern, given that you're dealing with sensitive information, with client information. What do you believe would be are banks and some of the smaller FIs ready? Because I think, Shabana, as you mentioned, not all banks are across the same level of tech maturity that we have and what the regulator also expects. So what would be your guidance in terms of for those kind of banks to actually achieve compliance with not only with the Data Protection Act per se, but also other requirements from an RBI perspective? And I'll probably come back to Pranav in terms of best practices, in terms of what he's seeing and how can banks and others comply with the new act as well. Shabana?
Yeah, right. So my approach is this, based on my multiple privacy implementation experiences and auditing experiences, is that not only RBI, but generally also I follow this approach that all banks who are hoping to keep themselves compliant to the new act should first start with inventorizing their private data. Okay, they have to identify how much and what kind of data they are sitting on, which needs to be protected under the act first. I think that is, major bulk of work that is required in complying ourselves. So for example, if you already have an asset register where you have a confidentiality, integrity, availability rating across each of your assets, you may also want to add a privacy rating to that asset, whether it is carrying private data, okay, as per the criteria that identify data as private, and also maybe a sensitivity rating, because not all private data is sensitive, but some of it is sensitive, and the legal impact of that data leaking is much higher than just private data. Of course, there is legal, impact for private data also, but sensitive data also. So if a bank could do that, okay, then they would have much better control on how to, what to apply control. Okay, and then how much control needs to be applied. If a privacy had a high, medium, low rating, I would have a much better handle on, because you can't apply controls to anything and everything also. Okay, because one has to be efficient also. One has to think about the overheads of implementing privacy controls also. Okay, and banks have huge data, so you cannot afford to put, umbrella controls, is what I'm trying to say. So first, inventorizing private data and giving it some kind of rating would help. And I would recommend that they give ratings from the legal perspective. Okay, if this data leaks, what will happen? How badly will we be hit? Okay, and that should be the main criteria in identifying the category of private data. And then the bank will further have to take a call on controls to be applied and the costs involved and what are the best ways to do it.
So Probably just to rephrase what I would say is one, discover the data that you have in your estate, data discovery, data classification, a data catalog in terms of where, what is stored, etc. And also in terms of doing a business impact as well as a data privacy impact assessment for any current and new projects. Probably Pranav, coming back to you again, it's a difficult one. I know I'm sure you're definitely working towards it, if not completely, you're ready for it. But what would be your take on the privacy or the big question in town right now?
So, unfortunately, it is very early days when I say, into data privacy. Possibly about 4 years back, and we looked into the 2018, 2016 cybersecurity guidelines, which were released by RBI, and there was a brief mention. Accordingly, we also had mentions about, some mentions, if not a whole full-fledged data privacy policy, but they had mandated to have in your cybersecurity policy a mention of what are the activities which you are planning to do, or at least have a mention about how you are planning to verify whether you have access to PII, and then possibly how do you manage the privacy. It all started when the regulators asked us to possibly, or rather mandated us to put a clause on privacy in the website itself. Right. So all this while when we are browsing specific financial institutions website, if not on the cybersecurity, you would definitely find a clause which is a part of the website on privacy. So I think before even the Data Privacy Act, the DPDPA came into existence, I think banks have been working towards it. Now, extending a thought, what Shabana was mentioning, knowing what is PII, or personally identifiable information, is something which is a key to this. You might want as a bank to have a lot of controls on all sorts of information which you have, but are we really aware what is exactly that we need to protect? Right? So I would like to extend that thought beyond only putting tools, but one very close to heart subject of mine, which is nothing but awareness. Right? Now, unfortunately, these days it has been figured out, with a lot of phishing simulation exercises, social engineering attacks, etc., which we try to simulate within the organization. The users are typically found wanting. Right? So either they are so much used to reporting false emails, that, or rather ransomware or phishing attack emails, that they start reporting everything as a phishing email. They stop working. Right? That's the other extreme of side of the story. But the point what I wanted to make here is basically people need to understand what is the information which they are working on, and I think that is where the data classification and categorizing the data into different bucket comes into picture. I might want to extend that thought to putting a data leakage prevention program into the organization. I usually call DLP as a program and not as a solution, because it extends its arms, to different areas within the organization. So for us to have a successful data leakage prevention program, I think classification is the key. That is true, and that's where I wanted to extend this thought to PII information and to privacy as well. If you do not know what privacy, or rather what PII information you are handling, then unfortunately all the controls which we are putting, either they might be put into the wrong areas altogether, or you might end up putting so many controls that the business as usual becomes a challenge. I would like, also would like to put the kind of challenges which I am facing right now. Typically, the CISOs are looked at as a roadblock. If a specific information which is being asked for, right? Thus, if you go to a CISO, he will say, boss, first information or first answer to your query is no. Let me put my thought. Let me see how I can facilitate your function. But then again, stitching the same, or rather going back to the awareness piece, if people are not explained, in terms of what, a CISO's position is all about, and, he's answerable to the board, he's answerable to the regulators, but at the same time, the kind of controls which we are putting into, I think they are going to facilitate, and, that worry freeness, is something which will be coming to everybody's BAU. So they don't have to worry too much about, what has been put into the organization. They can do their business as usual. But for that to happen, I think that awareness has to be there, that has to be percolated. And that's where, the awareness about what is PII is also. So I think that's the thought which I wanted to leave you with on this particular.
Yeah, I totally agree. Awareness. DLP is not just tools and encryption and everything at the technical level. It's easier to implement. At the human level, it is a little tricky because, yeah, exactly as Pranav said, people need to know what is PII, what they have in their hands, and how precious it is, and if it is breached, what impact it will have to the organization. That needs to go out very clear. Yeah.
No, I think thanks for that both. And probably just to try and summarize, I think some of the important aspects have been we are moving towards age of continuous monitoring, then just a point in time assessment. We need to look out for risk and have risk-based approach in terms of doing any assessments or reporting, monitoring, as well as keeping compliant. The regulations will keep grow, but stick to the basics and also ensure that basic hygiene is maintained. Define baseline security standards for each of the processes, be it privileged user access management or cloud, and definitely keep continuous monitoring in place and try and have the same set of standards be applicable to your third parties, depending upon the tiering that you have, and also protect data not only with the vendor or within an organization, but across the entire life cycle of data. And I think what was close to Pranav's heart was definitely in terms of educating the investors as well as your customers, but also your internal employees in terms of how to handle data carefully and also have basic hygiene in place across the entire region.
Yeah, so that's just one more thing I wanted to add. When we say continuous monitoring, it typically sounds like you set a frequency for your monitoring and you keep monitoring, but it also involves monitoring change management. So when we go for a SaaS model or a PaaS model and the vendor releases a new version of it or makes changes in their offering, then they need to inform their vendors about this. Ideally, they should inform of the planned change first, and then when they should also inform when they are releasing the new one and what impact it would have to our organization when the new features or new version is updated or implemented. And the bank should have a policy on what they are going to do when the platforms on which it depends or the models on which it depends, whether you'll have a mandatory reassessment of the entire platform based on the changes. The bank has to take a call on those kind of things as well. The RBI auditors are expecting us to do that as well.
Sure. I think thanks for a great session, and we probably open it up to any other questions we have from the audience, or back to you, Shubhajit.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. We went through the questions. There is somebody saying difficult part would be changing the human behavior in terms of handling and processing the data. I think we have covered a decent bit of all of that. I would like to stick to time. I would like to thank all the attendees for staying and listening to us and engaging with us. I would like to thank all of you again, Siddharth, Pranav, and Shabana, for taking the time and sharing your very knowledgeable wisdom that comes only from practice to everybody. So really appreciate everyone's time and thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.